Dave LaCalle with HeadGames Motorworks. Today we're going to talk about a freaking mess of cylinder heads. Check it out. So sometimes you come across cylinder heads from other shops that make you just say, would you look at that? Like, you cannot believe that they actually thought that this was a good idea and then said, you know what, let's improve it a little bit and then make it worse. And that's what we have here. My buddy Tim brought me some KA24 heads. They're off of his race car. He's actually won a championship with this car. He road races it, and he's actually quite successful. And he just brought them here to just get them refreshed, and that's what I thought we were doing. But then right off the top, I seen that there was some geometry issues, and then we piled into the heads that he's been using, and he bought them from another shop, and they are a freaking mess. Check it out. So you probably wonder why I just said he won a championship, and then the guy who he bought these from apparently was also a champion. And then how could they be that awful? Well, I guess we all have a different view of what good is, right? So just because it's working and it hasn't failed does not mean that it's right. And I think that's a lot of people will confuse the two. They think just because it hasn't failed that this thing is awesome. And mathematically, actually, there is no sense in this thing at all. So it's really just all in the valve train. Let me show you some stuff here. Now, this is a titanium exhaust valve that they made this, or somehow put this titanium retainer on with a Super 7 lock from Del West. And these things are supposed to turn, but once you pull it tight, this thing doesn't turn at all. So that would be one thing. So they put a lash cap on it, and the lash cap doesn't really fit this. And you can see, you can actually move it around because the stem diameter is different than the diameter or the inner diameter of the lash cap. So what it did was it wears into here. And then you also got to think it's also not the right height. So this should sit snug, or at least closer to the lock, and it doesn't. So now we're going to worry about geometry, unless, well, we already know that nobody paid attention to geometry. They didn't care about any of that stuff. But that's what is going on this cylinder head. Now, we can talk about what they did right. Now, the groove in this valve actually fits the Super 7 lock perfectly. I don't think that they would make a Super 7 lock with this small of a valve, but it appears they do. And you'll notice how on the bottom here, you see how it doesn't really push into the lock well. Sorry about that. So I would say that this is not fitting correctly. But I didn't expect it to, because they probably don't make one that fits this valve. And they just kind of made it work. And yeah, I was being facetious when I said, here's what they got right, because you can see that this thing doesn't fit right. So now for the other side, again, a titanium valve. And they made this retainer, or had this retainer, and it fits perfectly, right? It is, it's pretty cool. You can see it doesn't hang on the bottom side. Well, you can see all the damage from the valve spring hitting it. Now you might be thinking, oh, it's titanium, so it's got to be soft. Well, you know, things are actually made to work together. This is because the retainer actually didn't fit the valve spring. We'll show that in a second here. But you see this, right? You see how the tip of the valve looks a little mushroom now. That's because we again took, I don't even know where they got this valve from. It has two grooves. We're not using the second groove because they have a single groove lock that kind of fits in there. And you know, it's almost like they just, they were like walking around the shop and you say, oh man, that'll work. Let's just add that to this mix, you know? And they didn't actually measure anything or think it would work. They just did. And this thing actually ran, or runs, I should say. But, you know, me being me, I just can't put shit back together like this. This is craziness to me. I can't even do that. So, yeah, so now we have a double groove, square groove lock. We have square groove locks. Now, the spring height is completely off. The geometry is completely off because the stem height's not the right. And then the spring. Check out the spring. See, this is the inner spring. It goes inside this dual spring here. It's a dual spring and it has a little dampener inside there. And what they did was they said, oh, that's good enough. It doesn't need to seat all the way down because, you know, seating all the way down would make sense. But apparently they don't like to make sense. And this could cause a coil bind issue because the spring is no longer at the correct height. I don't know what that is, but it looks a good at least 150 thousandths worth of spring height. And then they stick it in here, and obviously it's not going to behave because it's the wrong spring. You notice here that there is two different guide sizes from intake to exhaust. So this is the intake and here is the exhaust. If you can take a look at the hole over here, so the hole is much bigger here. And there's really no reason for it. I don't understand. I said nothing fits. It's almost later. I said they were walking around. They're like, "Oh man, this is the thing we need to use." Mind you, this is all the notes that we have just for these two cylinder heads, and we got a third here as well that we're going to show you in a second. But these are all just the notes. There's a lot of time invested in this. If it wasn't for Tim, my buddy Tim Proctor, if it wasn't that he's a buddy of mine, this would not happen at HeadGames. I just let you know that right now. If you're ever thinking about it, once we figure this out, maybe we'll do one for you, but so far, no good. I remember I showed you a dual spring with a dampener that was on the one head, so that's one spring. You can see that the inner spring does not fit that whatsoever. It's really just not meant to be there. And then they introduced a second spring that doesn't have a dampener and is not the same height. And then we have a third spring here where the inner spring does fit it and it's somewhat the same height. So we have like two here, one that fits, one does not, one smaller. And you would think that that would be enough for them, but no. We have just one more spring that they added to the mix. And this is also a dual spring without a dampener. It does seem like the inner spring fits it. And they decided to put that with a stock retainer and a titanium valve. So we have, this is supposed to be a set, right? Like these were, it's a single 4-cylinder. The guy was running 2 engines, and you would think for a winning combination, they would just have one winning combination, but instead they have 4 springs, 3 retainers, or actually 4 retainers, and 3 different sets of locks. 0 of it actually fits the head or works for anything that's going on here. Well, I guess it works, but it's not. None of this is right. Not to mention that you'll look at the stem heights of these and they're all completely different. And it has a rocker, so they should be somewhat the same, right? And you can see like the valve itself is not even the same height or even close to the same height. So all the geometry completely wrong. So I said, Tim, I need a stock cylinder head because this is a freaking mess. And so you got us a stock cylinder head, and I found online that a certain company sold parts for the KA24. Now, just so we're on the same page, this is not the 16 valve. This is the 12 valve. So it has 1 big intake valve, 2 small exhaust valves, and it's a little rare. So we never worked on one of these before. So I found something online, and we got those in. So now we got an intake and exhaust valve with a single groove, and you can see the stem or the tip heights look the same. The locks look the same. This one's machined down so you can use the same lock on both sides. I like it, I like it. Those are cool. So this is the exhaust spring, and the exhaust spring fits. I like that. But when we go to the intake side, there's a problem there. It don't fit. So now you got to machine the spring pocket to fit the valve spring. Not really what I was looking for. I was looking for a drop-in solution. So the second part of this problem is that he has 563 thousandths of lift, and you can't fit that much lift in this valve spring. So now we have a coil bind issue. We can't use the spring. And I was told that it would fit it, and now we have just a complete cluster. We have 3 heads, a whole bunch of valve train, and nothing fits. How are we going to fix this? So you're wondering how I'm going to fix this? This is the best solution I can think of. Throw that crap away. But in reality, it's up to Tim what he wants to do. I want to scrap this deal and just go to a DE, the K24DE, but and he is not against it. He's a Nissan technician, so he is familiar with doing all this stuff, but he kind of still wants to give this thing a go. And I don't know how we're going to fix this just yet. We have to find a spring kit that's going to fit and it's going to work with the valve. We might go into some custom stuff, which I'm not trying to do all that. I don't know. Maybe we're going to do another video once I do figure it out, or I'm just going to send this thing packing, because as much as I love Tim, I don't have time for Tim. So that is all I got to say about that. So stay tuned. There might be a part 2 on these. Absolutely a conundrum. I don't expect this part 2 to be anytime soon, but if you like, subscribe, and press that button where you can get notifications, you might want to see it again. That's it for us today. Hope you enjoyed the video, seeing this mess. Toodles.
HeadGames!